She stood in front of 200 people and called him worthless. A broke embarrassment. Dead weight she'd been carrying for 6 years. She announced she wanted a divorce, right there at her promotion party, in front of everyone who mattered in her world. Then the managing partner stood up, his face white as a ghost, and said 4 words that made her blood run cold. He owns this company. What happened next destroyed her career, her reputation, and taught her the most expensive lesson of her life. Because the husband she thought had nothing, he had everything, and she was about to lose it all. This is the true story of a man who pretended to be poor to see if his wife would love him anyway. And what happened when she failed the test she didn't even know she was taking. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you a story about a man who made himself invisible. Not because he wanted to hide, but because he wanted to see the truth. His name was Daniel Ross, and if you passed him on the street in Chicago, you probably wouldn't look twice. He wore simple clothes from discount stores. He drove a 12-year-old Honda with a scratch on the side. He was the kind of man people's eyes just slipped right past, like he wasn't even there. But invisible is exactly what Daniel wanted to be. At least for a while. Daniel was married to a woman named Victoria Sterling. And Victoria? She was everything Daniel was not. She was loud, ambitious, shining. She worked at one of the biggest consulting firms in the city, climbing that corporate ladder like her life depended on it. Designer suits, expensive lunches, a sports car that cost more than most people make in a year. And Daniel, he was just her husband. The one who stayed home. The one nobody asked about at parties. The one Victoria introduced with a tight smile and a quick change of subject. Here's what nobody knew, though. Daniel Ross wasn't just a stay-at-home husband. He was Daniel Montgomery Ross, founder and CEO of Titan Industries, a manufacturing empire worth nearly $5 billion. Yes, you heard that right. Billion with a B. He built it from nothing, starting in his parents' garage when he was 23 years old. By the time he was 30, he was managing contracts with half the Fortune 500 companies in America. He took calls with executives in Germany and Japan. He signed deals that made headlines in the business papers. But when Victoria woke up each morning, Daniel would close his laptop, change into his plain clothes, and become just Daniel, her husband. The embarrassment. They'd met 7 years ago at a community center volunteer event. Daniel had been there setting up computers for kids, and Victoria had been there taking photos for her company's charity campaign. She'd smiled at him, and that smile had felt like sunshine. She'd asked him out for coffee, and he'd said yes. On their 3rd date, over Chinese food in a small restaurant, Daniel had tried to tell her. I run my own business, he'd said. Manufacturing, logistics, that kind of thing. Victoria had patted his hand like you'd pat a child. That's nice, honey. A little business. Maybe it'll grow someday. Daniel had opened his mouth to explain. To tell her about the factories, the employees, the billions in revenue. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd already moved on, talking about her latest project at work. Maybe it was curiosity about who she'd be if she thought he was ordinary. Or maybe deep down, Daniel was just tired. Tired of people who wanted his money. Tired of women who saw dollar signs before they saw him. So he'd let Victoria believe what she wanted to believe. And what Victoria wanted to believe was that she was the successful one. The provider. The star. She'd proposed to him on a beach in Mexico, drunk on margaritas and sunset. He'd said yes because he loved her. Or thought he did. Or hoped he could. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed without reading it. Too focused on wedding plans and too sure she was the one with everything to lose, sat in Daniel's lawyer's office. She'd barely glanced at it before scribbling her signature. 6 years of marriage had shown Daniel exactly who Victoria Sterling was when she thought her husband had nothing. She was cruel. Every morning, Victoria would leave early for work, barely saying goodbye. And every morning, Daniel would wait for her car to disappear down the street before opening his laptop. He'd become someone else then. The CEO. The man who ran board meetings and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. He'd review quarterly reports. He'd approve expansion plans. He'd negotiate deals worth hundreds of millions. And then, when he heard Victoria's car in the driveway at night, he'd close everything down and go back to being nobody. Victoria never asked what he did all day. Never wondered how they afforded the mortgage on a house that should have been beyond her salary. Never questioned the fact that Daniel seemed content without working a real job. She just assumed he was living off her. and she resented him for it. At her work parties, she'd introduce him with apologetic shrugs. "This is Daniel, my husband. He's between things right now." The pity in people's eyes. The judgment. The way Victoria's colleagues would glance at him, and then quickly away, embarrassed for her. Daniel would stand there in his simple button-down shirt from Target, holding a beer, listening to Victoria laugh too loud with her coworkers. Watching her touch the arm of Kevin from accounting a little too long. Seeing the way she'd distance herself from Daniel whenever her boss was nearby. He knew about Kevin. Had known for 6 months. The perfume that wasn't his. The late nights that became later. The way Victoria barely looked at him anymore, like he was furniture she'd grown tired of. But Daniel didn't say anything. He just watched. Waited. Wanted to see how far it would go. The truth was, Daniel could have left any time. Could have told her the truth and watched her face change. Could have revealed who he really was and seen her scramble to keep him. But he didn't want that. He wanted something simpler. Something real. He wanted a wife who would love him when she thought he had nothing. A partner who would see his worth without a price tag attached. Someone who would ask him about his day, his thoughts, his dreams. Victoria had failed that test every single day for 6 years. And now Daniel was about to stop being invisible. The invitation came on expensive cardstock with gold lettering. Victoria had left it on the kitchen counter like a challenge. Annual Partners Celebration, it read. Celebrating our newest senior partner, Victoria Sterling. Senior partner at 34. The youngest in her firm's history. Victoria had been insufferable for weeks, trying on outfits, practicing her speech in the mirror, reminding Daniel every chance she got about this incredible achievement. "You have to come," she'd told him 3 days before the event, not looking up from her phone. "It would look weird if my husband wasn't there. Just try not to embarrass me, okay? Maybe borrow a decent suit from someone." Daniel had nodded quietly. He'd watched her leave for a spa day, spending money on preparations for a party that was supposed to celebrate her success. Money she thought was hers alone. That afternoon, while Victoria was gone, Daniel stood in his closet. Way in the back, behind the simple clothes he wore every day, hung suits he never touched. Armani, Tom Ford, Brioni, each one worth more than Victoria's monthly car payment. He pushed them aside and pulled out something simple. A navy suit from Macy's he'd bought years ago. He did his own hair, his own tie. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw what Victoria saw. Someone ordinary. Someone forgettable. Someone she was ashamed to be married to. Before he left, Daniel made a phone call. "It's time," he said quietly to his attorney. "I'll see you there." The party was at the Pinnacle, an upscale venue on the 40th floor with views of the entire Chicago skyline. Daniel arrived by Uber. Victoria had left without him hours earlier. He stood in the doorway and took it all in. Crystal chandeliers. Ice sculptures shaped like the company logo. A champagne fountain. Men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses. This was Victoria's world, and he'd never belonged in it. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because he'd chosen not to perform it. He saw Victoria immediately. She was holding court near the bar, Kevin standing just a little too close. She wore red, bold and bright, and laughed at everything her colleagues said. People clustered around her, celebrating her, and she glowed with success and champagne and the intoxicating feeling of being admired. Daniel felt something crack in his chest, but he didn't look away. Someone else was watching too. Gregory Winters, the managing partner who'd hired Victoria 7 years ago, stood near the windows. When Daniel entered, Gregory's eyes went wide. Real recognition. The kind that sees through disguises. His face went pale, and he started across the room, moving fast. But he was too far away. Victoria had already seen Daniel. "Oh look," Victoria announced, her voice carrying across the room. "My husband finally made it. Did you have trouble finding the place, honey?" Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. The kind people make when they know they're watching something they shouldn't. Daniel walked toward her, his footsteps quiet on the polished floor. Every eye followed him. He saw the judgment, the pity, the contempt. These people had decided who he was years ago based on nothing but his clothes and his silence. "Victoria," Daniel said quietly. "Can we talk? Privately." "Why?" She was swaying slightly, drunk on champagne and power. "Embarrassed? You should be. Look around, Daniel. See all these successful people? Their spouses are doctors, executives, lawyers. And what are you? A man who sits at home all day doing. What exactly?" Kevin touched her arm, suddenly uncomfortable. Victoria, come on. Don't do this. But Victoria was past stopping. 6 years of resentment came pouring out like poison. No, he needs to hear this. I've carried him for 6 years. Financially, socially. He's contributed nothing. He's dead weight. The only reason I haven't divorced him is because I felt sorry for him. The room went silent. Even the servers stopped moving. Gregory Winters was pushing through the crowd, but he wasn't fast enough. Victoria turned to address the whole room now, like she was giving a presentation. You all want to know the truth? I married down. Way down. He came from nothing. A trailer park in Ohio. I thought I could help him, make something of him. But you can't make a silk purse from a pig's ear, right? The contempt in her voice was clear. The way she said trailer park, like it was a disease. The way she looked at Daniel like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Daniel stood perfectly still. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were dry. He'd endured worse than this. Poverty, yes. Hunger. Doors slammed in his face because of where he came from. But this hurt differently because he'd loved her once. Believed in her once. Given her 6 years to see him, really see him. And she'd been looking right through him the entire time. Are you finished? His voice was soft but steady. No, I'm not finished. Victoria's words were slurring now. I want a divorce. Kevin and I are together. Everyone knows it anyway. You can have that sad little Honda and whatever's in your savings account. Consider yourself lucky I don't ask for alimony. Victoria, stop talking. Right now. Gregory Winters's voice cut through the room like a knife. Victoria turned, annoyed. Gregory, I'm just being honest. Everyone's been too polite to say it, but do you have any idea who you just humiliated in front of this entire room? Victoria blinked. My husband. Soon-to-be ex-husband. Your husband is Daniel Montgomery Ross. Gregory said the name like a prayer, like speaking the name of God. The room gasped. Actually gasped. And Daniel watched Victoria's face as her world began to fall apart. Victoria laughed. But it was a nervous sound, uncertain. What? His middle name is Montgomery. So what? Daniel Montgomery Ross, Gregory repeated, his voice shaking. As in Titan Industries. As in the $5 billion manufacturing empire. As in the man who owns 40% of this consulting firm. The words hung in the air like bombs waiting to explode. Victoria's face went white. Then red. Then white again. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in 6 years. Searching for signs that this was a joke. A mistake. A misunderstanding. But Daniel's face was calm. Quiet. And in his eyes was something she'd never seen before. Power that didn't need to hide anymore. That's impossible, Victoria stammered. Daniel doesn't work. He's home all day. He drives a Honda. He buys his clothes at. He works from home because he runs a global manufacturing company. Gregory's voice cracked with desperation. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, pulling up a Forbes article. He's one of the most powerful industrialists in the country. How do you not know this? How do you not know your own husband? He shoved the phone in Victoria's face. There was Daniel in a sharp suit, standing in front of a factory, looking nothing like the man she thought she knew. The headline read, Daniel Ross, the billionaire nobody talks about. Victoria's hands trembled as she took the phone. Zoomed in. Tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Kevin had backed away from her, actually taken several steps back, like she'd suddenly become toxic. The other partners were standing now, moving toward Daniel with panic in their eyes. The federal court judge near the back had his hand over his mouth. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered, but nobody looked. Daniel spoke then, and his voice carried through the silent room with a quiet authority that made everyone freeze. I founded Titan Industries 12 years ago. I was already a multimillionaire when we met, Victoria. Why didn't you tell me? Victoria's voice broke, desperate, knowing the answer but needing to hear it anyway. I did tell you. On our third date. I said I ran my own manufacturing business. You patted my hand and called it a little business and said maybe it would grow someday. You never asked again. Never showed interest. Never wanted to know. Daniel's voice was gentle now, almost sad. For 6 years, Victoria, I've taken calls with executives in Tokyo while you slept. I've closed $100 million deals while you complained about me making coffee at home instead of buying it at Starbucks. I've run an empire from the next room, and you never once asked what I was doing. But you lived so small. Victoria grasped at logic that didn't exist. The old car, the discount clothes, I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing. Daniel's words cut through her excuses. I wanted to know if you'd love me without money. If you'd respect me for who I was, not what I had. You failed that test every single day for 6 years. Gregory turned on Victoria, and all professionalism vanished. Do you understand what you've just done? This man has the power to destroy this firm. He can pull his investment. We'll be bankrupt by Monday. Every person in this room will lose their job because you couldn't control your mouth for 5 minutes. The other partners were crowding around Daniel now, apologizing over each other, voices high with panic. Victoria stood alone. Even Kevin had disappeared into the crowd. She reached for Daniel, grabbed his arm. Not gently. Daniel, baby, I didn't mean any of it. It was the alcohol, the stress, the promotion. You know I love you. We can work this through. You meant every word. Daniel removed her hand from his arm. And now everyone knows who you really are. They know what you think of people who come from trailer parks. They know you measure human worth in designer labels and job titles. They know you're capable of public cruelty to someone who loved you and tolerated your arrogance with grace. An older man in an expensive suit approached. Victoria recognized him. Judge Harold Chun, one of the most respected judges in Illinois. He'd been sitting quietly in the back all night. The judge put a protective hand on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel, I'm so sorry you endured this. Judge Chun looked at Victoria with barely disguised disgust. For the record, I've known Daniel since he was 19 years old. I mentored him through his first business deals. I watched him build everything from nothing. Nothing. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. He grew up in a trailer with a single mother who worked 3 jobs. He put himself through community college while working nights at a factory. He earned everything he has through brilliance, hard work, and more character than you'll ever possess. Daniel turned to Gregory, and his voice became businesslike. Efficient. The voice of a man who'd made billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. I'm pulling my investment from Sterling Consulting. I cannot in good conscience support a firm that employs someone like Victoria. Gregory's face crumpled. Daniel, please. There are innocent people here. People with families. Mortgages. I'll give the other partners 60 days to buy out my shares or find new investment. That's more than generous. But Victoria Sterling will be terminated immediately. Those are my terms. Non-negotiable. Gregory didn't hesitate. 20 years of working with Victoria evaporated in an instant. He turned to her, and his voice was cold. You're fired. Clear your office tonight. Security will escort you. Victoria grabbed Daniel's arm again, harder this time. And for a moment, something dangerous flashed in Judge Chen's eyes. But Daniel handled it himself. He removed his wedding ring and placed it deliberately on the table between them. My lawyers will contact you about the divorce. And that's when Victoria realized she'd lost everything. Victoria's voice rose to a pitch Daniel had never heard before. Pure panic. You can't do this. I'll fight it. I'll get a lawyer. I'll. Fight what? Daniel's voice was calm, almost kind in its cruelty. You publicly admitted to adultery in front of a room full of witnesses. You humiliated me based on my background, my class. I have 200 witnesses, and at least 50 people recorded this on their phones. It's probably already on social media. He was right. Around the room, phones were out. Some people were barely hiding the fact that they were filming. This moment was being captured, preserved, ready to go viral. The business world is smaller than you think, Victoria, Daniel continued. People talk. By tomorrow morning, every consulting firm in Chicago will know what happened here tonight. You'll be lucky to get hired anywhere in this industry. Kevin approached then, his expensive cologne suddenly seeming too strong, too obvious. Mr. Ross, I didn't know. I swear, if I'd known who you were. Daniel cut him off with a look. You'd only have had integrity if I had visible wealth. That tells me everything I need to know about you, too. He turned to face the entire room. And in that moment, Daniel wasn't invisible anymore. He was the most important person there. The sun that everyone else orbited around. Let this be a lesson, Daniel said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. I've been in this room before. Holiday parties. Summer barbecues. Company picnics. I was ignored. Dismissed. Treated like I didn't matter. Some of you laughed at Victoria's jokes about me. You judged me by my car and my clothes and the fact that I didn't perform wealth for your comfort. People looked at the floor. Studied their champagne glasses. Couldn't meet his eyes. Not one person in this room, in 6 years, asked me what I did or who I was beyond being Victoria's husband. You saw a quiet man in simple clothes and assumed I was less than. You saw someone who didn't play your status games and decided I didn't matter. Daniel's voice grew stronger. Well, I matter. And I always did. Your inability to see that says everything about you and nothing about me. Judge Chen offered his arm, and Daniel took it. They walked toward the exit, Daniel's head high, his steps measured and certain. He didn't look back at Victoria. Didn't give her the satisfaction of a final glance. The door closed behind him. Only then did the room erupt into chaos. Voices talking over each other. Phones being pulled out. The story already spreading like wildfire through text messages and social media posts. Victoria collapsed into a chair. Her promotion forgotten. Her career ended. Her marriage destroyed. Everything she'd worked for gone in 15 minutes. Because she couldn't see what was right in front of her. Because she measured worth in all the wrong ways. Because she was exactly the kind of person who would fail a test she didn't even know she was taking. The video went viral within hours. Someone had uploaded it to YouTube with the title, "Woman Publicly Humiliates Husband, Discovers He's a Billionaire." 5 million views in the first day. 10 million by the end of the week. The comments were brutal. She deserves everything she gets. Imagine being married to a billionaire and not even knowing it. This is what happens when you judge people by their appearance. Victoria's name became a punchline. Her face, twisted with shock and horror at the moment of revelation, became a meme. Articles were written. Think pieces about class, wealth, marriage, and the dangers of judging people by their appearance. The consulting firm tried to do damage control, but it was too late. Daniel pulled his investment, and within 60 days, the firm had to restructure completely. Half the staff was let go. The partners had to take pay cuts. The Chicago office closed. Victoria couldn't find work anywhere in consulting. Every firm knew her name. Every interview ended with uncomfortable questions about that incident at the party. She tried to reach out to Daniel. Text messages that went unanswered. Emails that bounced back. She showed up at his house once, but security turned her away. The house she'd lived in for 6 years, never knowing it was worth $8 million. Kevin stopped returning her calls after the first week. His career had taken a hit too, but not as badly. He could recover. She couldn't. Victoria ended up taking a job at a small firm in Milwaukee, making a third of what she used to make. She moved into a studio apartment, sold her sports car, and bought a used sedan. Shopped at the same discount stores she used to mock Daniel for using. And every night, alone in her small apartment, she'd think about the man she'd been married to. The man she'd never really known. The man she'd humiliated because she thought he was beneath her. The man who'd been testing her all along. Meanwhile, Daniel's face was everywhere. Bloomberg. Fortune. Forbes. Not because of the scandal, but because he'd been hiding in plain sight for years. Reporters wanted to know why. How? What made a billionaire choose to live like an ordinary person? In interviews, Daniel was gracious. He never spoke badly about Victoria. He simply said, "I wanted to know who I was without the money. And I wanted to see who the people around me were too." He started a foundation providing business loans and mentorship to entrepreneurs from low-income backgrounds. He testified before Congress about economic mobility. He wrote articles about the dangers of measuring human worth by material success. And slowly, Daniel began to heal. 6 months after that terrible night, he met someone new. A teacher named Rebecca who had no idea who he was. She knew him as Daniel, the guy who volunteered at the community center teaching kids about business. And this time, he told her the truth on the first date. And she loved him anyway. A year after the party that changed everything, Daniel saw Victoria one more time. It was by accident. A street corner in downtown Chicago on a cold November morning. He was walking out of a coffee shop, laughing at something Rebecca had just said, and there she was. Victoria stood at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. She looked different. Older, somehow, though only a year had passed. Her clothes were nice but not designer. Her hair was simpler. The confidence that had always surrounded her like armor was gone. Their eyes met across the sidewalk. For a moment, neither of them moved. A whole year of silence stretched between them. A whole marriage that had been built on lies, both his and hers. Victoria's mouth opened like she wanted to say something. An apology, maybe. An explanation. Something to make sense of what had happened between them. But Daniel just gave her a small nod. Not cruel. Not kind. Just acknowledgement that they'd both existed in each other's lives once upon a time. Then he took Rebecca's hand and continued walking. Victoria watched him disappear into the crowd, and she understood, finally and far too late, what she'd lost. Not the money, though that would have been nice. Not the security or the status or any of those things she'd valued so much. She'd lost a good man. A man who would have loved her through anything if she'd just seen him. Really seen him. The truth about Daniel and Victoria's story isn't really about money at all. That's what people miss when they hear it. They think it's about a rich man teaching his gold-digging wife a lesson. But that's not it. Daniel didn't hide his wealth to trick Victoria. He hid it to find truth. Think about it. When you have money, real money, how do you ever know if people love you for who you are? How do you know if that friend really enjoys your company or just enjoys your vacation house? How do you know if that partner loves you or loves your bank account? Daniel had been burned before. Women who suddenly became interested when they learned about his money. Friends who always needed loans. Family members who appeared out of nowhere with sob stories and requests for help. So when he met Victoria, and she assumed he was ordinary, he let her believe it. Not to test her, at least not at first. Just to experience being loved for himself. Just to know what that felt like. But over time, it did become a test. And Victoria failed it in every possible way. She failed it every time she introduced him with an apologetic shrug. Every time she complained about his clothes or his car. Every time she made him feel small for not having what she thought success looked like. She failed it every time she chose Kevin over him. Every time she prioritized her image over their marriage. Every time she measured his worth by his paycheck instead of his character. The saddest part? Daniel would have loved her through anything. If she'd been kind, if she'd respected him, if she'd treated him like a partner instead of a burden, he would have revealed the truth eventually. Would have shared his world with her. Would have built a life together based on mutual respect and love. But she couldn't do it. Couldn't love him without the trappings of success. Couldn't see value in a man who didn't perform wealth. And that's the real lesson of this story. We live in a world that teaches us to judge people by what they have. The car they drive. The clothes they wear. The job title on their business card. The neighborhood they live in. The restaurant they can afford to eat at. We've been trained to see wealth as worthiness. To see success as value. To see status as substance. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if the person in the old Honda has more wisdom than the person in the Mercedes? What if the man in the discount store shirt has more character than the man in the designer suit? What if the woman who clips coupons has more financial intelligence than the woman who spends without thinking? What if worth has nothing to do with money at all? Daniel learned this lesson the hard way, growing up in that trailer park in Ohio. He learned that his mother, working 3 jobs and still finding time to read him bedtime stories, was worth more than all the wealthy people who looked down on them. He learned that character isn't built in luxury, it's built in struggle. That dignity isn't purchased, it's practiced. And when he made his fortune, he never forgot it. That's why he lived simply. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because he understood that a 12-year-old Honda gets you to the same places as a sports car. Because he knew that discount store clothes keep you just as warm as designer labels. Because he'd learned that real wealth isn't in your bank account, it's in your relationships, your integrity, your kindness. Victoria learned this lesson too late. She learned it in a studio apartment in Milwaukee, shopping at thrift stores not by choice but by necessity. She learned it in job interviews where people looked at her with the same contempt she'd once looked at Daniel. She learned it in the lonely nights, realizing she'd thrown away something precious because she couldn't see past the surface. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we learn too late. Daniel went on to live a beautiful life. He married Rebecca in a small ceremony with close friends and family. They had 2 children. He taught them to measure people by their kindness, not their possessions. To see worth in character, not in cash. To understand that the best things in life aren't things at all. He still runs Titan Industries, but he does it from a normal house in a normal neighborhood. He still drives modest cars and wears simple clothes. Not because he's hiding anymore, but because he's free. Free from the need to impress anyone. Free from the game of status and show. Free to be exactly who he is. And that, more than any amount of money, is what real wealth looks like. The end.